Welcome to episode 47 of The Balancing Act. I'm Dan Strafford. Today, we're kicking off a new mini-series, everybody applaud, entitled Death, Taxes, and Change. The saying used to be the only constants in life are death and taxes. In this series, we're going to explore a third constant in life, change. Now, Andy, before we get to change, I'd love to hear what's changed in your life. What's new? How are you doing?
Yeah, doing great. Just moved our eldest son across the country from Portland, Oregon to Madison, Wisconsin. And so I was in a 20-foot U-Haul basically bouncing across the countryside for 3 full days. And I got to see 2 states that I'd never been to, which were the states of Idaho and Montana. So
there you go.
It's a very, very beautiful countryside. And if you get the chance to go there, and right now, our listeners are going to listen to this later in the summer, but the Yellowstone River is flooding like right now, and we drove over that river several times, and It is an angry river, let me tell you.
Yeah, you've seen Yellowstone pretty much shut down completely to any tourism and any visitors, and feel for the people out there. I will say I've never been to Idaho and Montana. I've been to about 32 states, I think. During college, I got to travel a lot for college radio. But let's dive in. I love the topic, change management, the idea of change in business, but also, again, I always harken back to life and the change that happens every day, right? Life is a series of changing circumstances as we go. We've talked across this show about concepts like ego, critical thinking, new attitudes towards work, the reskilling revolution, and a ton others. Why is the topic of change important, and why talk about it now?
Well, we're coming out of the pandemic. It's very clear that a lot of leaders are asking people to come back into an office environment. We're doing some backsliding, I believe, into some old or legacy ways of thinking about work. So we're just, and we've had the quote unquote great resignation, or what some people call the great reset. So we're thinking about work very differently. We're thinking about the relationship between home life and work life differently. And there's just tons of change going on all around us. Political change, environmental change, and it's very rapid. So in this moment in time, I think it's really important that we double down and we have open, honest conversations about what change is and what it means to us and how we navigate through it.
So in your first book, you introduced us to the concept of entropy in business. And if you need to go and listen to that episode, you can pause this one here and go back and listen and read the book and do all of those things. But what's the relationship here between entropy and change? How do those two coincide?
Yeah, I like to think about if you don't have a plan for change, then entropy is going to step in, and it's going to change. It's going to provide some unknown direction that you're not ready for. Entropy is the concept that over time everything falls apart. It's based on the laws of thermodynamics, so it's a very natural process. But everything falls apart, and I think about entropy and change as if you just allow change to happen, then entropy is going to set in, and change will happen to you and not the other way around, where you can have some influence and hopefully some positive influence over the change that is happening to you or with you or around you.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And I think what you've done a great job across these episodes and in your first book, teaser there of what the next question is, but in your first book is connect these issues. It's not sort of these siloed individual thoughts. It's how they all connect together in the workplace, and how managers and middle managers can really reassess what's going on. And as I said, spoiler alert, in your next book, which is going to be released later this year, you talk about the importance of having a plan for change within your organization. Can you give us an example of the bad things that can happen when an organization doesn't have that strategy for how to deal with change?
Yeah. So, many managers, I'll affectionately call them bad bosses. I look back at my career and I had many quote unquote bad boss characteristics that I've since worked through. I have many other unconscious biases that I still need to work through. But one of the biases that I had earlier in my career was to imagine or think that once I told somebody to do something, that was the end of it. And that was no more, that was very apparent in the process of when we brought companies together. So when we did mergers and acquisitions, when we bought other businesses, you do all of this due diligence and you see it all on paper and you see this website and you're going to bring this business together with that business. And it's really, it might seem like a kind of a duh, why didn't you think of that moment for some when I say this, but a lot of times you really don't think about the people that make up those businesses. You get lost in the numbers, you get lost in the diligence, you get lost in the process. And it is really hard, it is really easy, I should say, to imagine that humans are coin-operated machines and you put them together and they're supposed to work nicely. I have seen so much corporate value destroyed through mergers and acquisitions that did not contemplate the human component of how teams were supposed to come together, roles and responsibility, goal setting, who does what, and then the time that it takes for all of that to get consumed and digested.
It's having a plan matters so much, and having a plan that takes in all of the factors rather than just the factors directly in front of you really is articulated well by you there. I've been involved in a couple of different acquisitions, one that was done very well, communication and people first, and one that was not, that was seemingly haphazard and led to problems. And so it is fascinating to think through change management, the actual, you hear about that in production and manufacturing, right? Change of a product or change, but this is people change. This is managing the change of a business and managing the change of people across their roles and what they might be doing and how they're going to interact with the company itself. Before we start, we typically have, some banter. Andy and I catch up. This isn't all performance for us here. We like to chat. And beforehand, you were talking about the concept of modeling change and the complexity, the incredible complexity of managing change. We're just hitting on that a little bit. Can you bring the listeners into that conversation and what was being discussed?
Yeah, so we all walk around with a set of change curves. And I say a set of change curves because if you've done any work on the concept of change management, you've probably seen something called a change management curve, and there are a number of consultants and businesses that help other businesses manage change, and they all have models that are very similar to one another. A change management curve takes an individual on the journey from point A, where there's a steady state, some steady state at point A, and then a change occurs, and then there's a journey to point B, which is the next steady state at some point in the future. And a change curve typically has a little bump up at the front in terms of well-being and how the individual feels about the change. There might be a little bit of excitement that happens right out of the gate, so everybody feels a little good about it. And then you start thinking about specifically, what does it mean for me? And what does it mean for the work that I do? And typically, change management curve then starts to go down until one reaches what some call the valley of despair. This is where you're like, what does this mean for me? And this sucks. I just hate this change, and I'm going to do everything I can to work against it. That's wallowing in the valley of despair. And then presumably there is some learning and growth that occurs. There's some acceptance that occurs, and then the well-being and competency start to increase until you reach that next steady state. In a perfect world, point A, change occurs. Point B is really, really close to that in time, and you move in a straight line up from point A to point B, right? That's the perfect world. That's the humans are coin-operated machines, and they can accept change, no problem.
Yep.
And then there's the other side of the coin where point A and some change occurs, and then it's just a straight line down over a very long period of time, and you never get out of that valley of despair, and no growth occurs, and you're actually worse off after the change than when you started. So it's really important. The long story short here is it's really important for managers to understand that that change is that there is a set of these change curves within each individual. Because the other point that I need to make is that Dan Strafford will react differently to one type of change than he will to another type of change. So I don't walk around with a single change management curve. I walk around with multiple change management curves that depend upon the circumstance.
Got it. You said the Valley of Despair. It's one of my favorite movies was Princess Bride with the Pit of Despair. If you haven't seen that movie, the Pit of Despair fits in well here to what Andy's talking about. Modeling change. It sounds a lot like the Gartner hype cycle, which is something I love to track as well. Yeah. The rising action, the falling action. Then do we come out the other side? Do we plateau again, or do we continue downward and into a world where despair becomes the culture and becomes the way work is done? And that's, no one wants to be in that organization. No one wants to be part of what that is. As you talk about, and as we talked before, reading the show notes you put together and trying to figure out this discussion, it's a huge topic. And the magnitude and complexity of change management challenges within organizations seems really daunting. And change within a single team is daunting, right? Within a 5 or 10 person team, thinking now, massive companies or mom and pop shops, what's one tool in your toolkit, one bow in your quiver, whatever phrase you want to use, that leaders and managers can use to yield better results during major change events within their org?
Yeah. Well, I'm an educator, so it should be no surprise that the one tool that I'll pick here of many is that of learning and development. That education that is combined with a plan for the change that is occurring. So you've got some big event, and we picked on mergers and acquisitions before. So let's go back to that. So let's assume you've got a big merger that's occurring. The thing that the leaders should be doing is looking at the cadence of that transaction and how teams are coming together, and think very, very carefully about the skills that each team possess and the skill gaps that might exist between teams, and be very purposeful and start plugging those skill gaps right away, because nothing says that you care, leader, care about me, the employee, more than saying, hey, we've thought proactively about the skills that you're going to need to be successful to make this transaction work, because you want it to work. We want it to work. You know, we're all together in this. And education is the thing that is going to drive those more positive results.
It makes so much sense, and I think it all ties together. You talk a lot, and these are my words here, not what Andy said, but you're investing in people. You're investing in the idea of people being what makes up your company, along with your product, along with your, and it seems so simple, right? It seems like such a simple concept, but doesn't always happen, and is something that can be a learned skill for managers out there of how to be more proactively people first, how to think proactively about change and about how it might influence your employees. What advice do you have for managers and leaders who want to improve their approach to managing change within the organization?
Yeah, so we've already talked about education, but so I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the other things that you've really got to have top of mind. And first and foremost, I think our listening skills. It is going back to the acquisition example. So much is happening over such a constrained period of time that it's really easy to say, well, we got the plan and we're sticking to the plan and we're going to march through the plan, and I'm not going to listen to anything else that comes in from the side, because frankly, I just don't have the time. I haven't made the time to listen to other voices. So, you know, you got to make that time and space for listening to how things are going throughout that change process, I should say. The second thing is to just really double down on clarity and consistency of messaging. If you've listened to any of our work or read any of my work before, you've heard me say that communication, especially for senior leaders, is one of the most important things that they do, but it's also can be one of the most painful things that they do, because from your voice and what you're hearing inside your head as the leader, you're saying the same thing over and over and over again. But that's the point. You've got to create that clarity and consistency, because if Dan has got this, if Dan is in the valley of despair of his particular change curve for that particular event, Dan is not listening to what you're saying. Dan is focused more about what's in it for me. And so you have to say things over and over and over again. So double down on clarity and consistency. Going right along with that, point number 3 is you got to be calm and you have to be patient, because things don't happen instantaneously. Change curves can drag out for long periods of time. And I've got a few more tips in my next book here on change, but the one I'll skip to is and the dramatic pause is purposeful, but remember that everyone is different. Avoid stereotyping groups of people, that the finance department somehow is made up all of people that look and will respond in a particular way. Yes, there are generalizations that can be made, but even within some type of nuclear team, you're still dealing. Just think about the math of Dan Strafford manages a team of 7 people. Well, those 7 people all have different change curves, and they have different sets of change curves. So you start to think of all of the combinations of change and change of the results and the outcomes that could come just from a small team of 7, and the number is of potential outcomes is astronomical.
It makes so much sense, and that's a math problem, right? It's really figuring out just the variety of different things that can happen as you exponentially move beyond one employee to 10 to 100, and trying to manage all of that. Absolutely, and change is tough. We talk about it in life, we talk about it in work, and you really need to have a plan and over communicate. And I think you saying keep calm makes so much sense, because you yourself, middle manager, CEO, whoever it might be, you're a person too. And you have the way you see things going. And you have this plan. And let's be honest, if you're a CEO or even, SVP somewhere, you've gotten there by leading and by being good at your job and knowing what you're doing. Hopefully, some of you, hey, good for you. But to then have that questioned or maybe shown that it's not 100% foolproof, that's very easy to react in a way, Andy, that, well, you're wrong, I'm right. And to be calm and cognizant and aware is such a huge upside.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dan, before we go, I'd like to hear from you on, a change process that you've gone through that has either gone really well or horrifically poorly, so that folks can learn from you about the kind of change journeys that you've been on.
So I cited the two before, and I'm not going to name names. So a scribe.
We don't do that here.
Exactly. You can go to my LinkedIn page and see the variety of companies I worked for over the years and decide who is who. One was the positive one. We were part of an organization that was purchased by another organization. So, we flat out were told, you're being bought by X. This is going to happen. And they communicated every day. They communicated, just even if there wasn't anything to communicate, hey, everything's on track. If you have any questions, here's the HR number. If you want to reach out to the new business, here's that email address.
Yep.
If you have any concerns about your future role, talk to this person. And it's just a continuous stream of reassurance. Hey, they never said, hey, we know you're scared, or hey, we know this is different, but they implied that by constantly giving us information. Yep. And then halfway through, the new company took that over. The new company started reaching out. The new company started making sure we were going to be integrated. Now, luckily for that, I think we had it easier because there weren't redundant services at the new company, right? There weren't those problems of, hey, Dan and Sarah do the same job.
Oh, yeah.
How are we determining who's keeping their job? Or are we moving Dan somewhere else? Or, hey, we produce these two products, these two different plungers. Now we're just going to produce one. That assembly line in Ohio is gone, whatever it might be. I didn't have to deal with that there. Yeah. The second one did have to deal with that.
The musical chair problem.
Yes. And there was little to no communication. And there was a lot of speculation that wasn't tamped down. And listen, Andy, I've talked about before, I'm a middling to low level employee where I work. I'm a worker bee for the most part.
Awesome guy, Dan.
I appreciate that, but I know, like, from the hierarchical way things work, I may be lower on the totem pole of needs to know, right? I'm not a needs to know person. I like to know, though. And so when I have a question and it wasn't being answered, and then other people had questions and they weren't answered. And then over time, oh, it's going to work. That person, Sally's no longer responding to my emails. Oh, she doesn't work here anymore. What happened to Sally? What happened to Joe? Oh, yeah, his position was eliminated. Whoa, wait, we're eliminating positions?
Right.
You didn't say anything about eliminate. And it just became this cascading effort of, you feel as an employee, you are now protecting your turf.
Yep.
You are now cordoning off, like, oh, I need to prove my worth so I don't get eliminated. And that's the valley of despair. That's that scary place where rumors get started. And, things change in a bad way, where people start turning off to the conversations and they don't listen to the good things that are happening. Because the company was still doing good things, but it did not manage the change in any way, shape, or form. And I left. I said, time to leave. And I think everyone's had those experiences in varying degrees. I'm a communicator, what I do, physically my job in doing video and audio production, but also in life. And I'm communicating to a fault at this point with my kids. I always apply this back to my kids. We have personal family stuff happening. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to make sure I'm using language that is appropriate for the audience, much like you were talking about for, billing analysts versus C-suite people. And, but communication is such a key, and it was so messy at that other place that there was none. It was just, it was a mess.
Yeah. And you can have two beautiful cultures, right? You have beautiful culture A, beautiful culture B, and again, on paper, everything looks great. And you bring them together, and all of a sudden, if there's that lack of communication and the lack of clarity, all of a sudden, two beautiful cultures can be a toxic waste dump of a culture in weeks. I mean, it does not take long. And then trying to unwind that.
That's the other thing. You set yourself
over
up
time,
for such.
It takes forever to reestablish that trust.
If the managers see it, right? Like, that's the other thing. Do they see the culture, or is it just people keep leaving and new people come on who ascribe to this new culture that's been created, and everything seems fine to those on high? It's a fascinating process, and I think I look forward to the new book, which we teased here and has been teased elsewhere. Andy said they're close to pencils down soon, which is obviously a testing analogy or metaphor, but also books. Yeah, I mean, we don't really write them with pencils anymore, but I look forward to it. The first one was a great success. I love the topics you've already started to introduce here around it, death, taxes, and change. But anyway, appreciate all that you're doing to really just inform a new way of managing. And I think there are people who naturally do what you are trying to teach people. There are people who are people and understand it and just get it from the jump. But I am finally in life a believer that you can change your personality in this way. You can learn new skills. You can learn people skills. It's not just an innate ability. Just like being a soccer player isn't just an innate ability. So really appreciate the work you're doing in rolling this out and trying to teach a new generation of managers that they can learn, they can grow, they can become better at the thing they're doing, including change management and the idea of how to move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
So you can find Andy, of course, andrewtemte.com. You can find The Balancing Act available across Amazon and all the different places you purchase a book, so your local bookstore. I have a great signed copy of it. I don't know if you're going to get that as well. You have to know Andy and find him to get him to sign it. But appreciate everyone listening. Subscribe on Spotify and Google Podcasts and Apple. Leave comments. If you want to find Andy and ask him a question, LinkedIn is a great spot to find him. He posts his Saturday morning news there every week, as well as other topics and other thoughts and introspections on his career and what he's doing now. So check that out. And I'm sure he'd also be happy to hear about show topics and show ideas and things that you are looking to learn more on as he continues his journey on this new career path. Until next time, you've been listening to The Balancing Act.